Sean Diddy Combs is facing more explosive allegations in a bombshell lawsuit, this one, filed by his reportedly former executive assistant who claims he was coerced into setting up drug-fueled parties and even performing degrading acts to prove his loyalty to the music mogul. We're going to break down these latest shocking details of alleged sexual coercion abuse and manipulation and how this adds to the mounting legal troubles for Sean Diddy Combs. Welcome to Sidebar presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, it is another day, and it is another Diddy lawsuit. Yep, this time from a man who said he was the former executive assistant of the disgraced rapper and music producer, and he's accusing Diddy of essentially sexual coercion abuse, battery sex, trafficking, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and it all stems, he says, from what happened at these lavish drug-fueled nights called Wild King Nights. So this 32-page lawsuit, which was reviewed by multiple outlets, including Rolling Stone, was apparently filed in Los Angeles by a man named Phillip Pines, who says he worked for Diddy from 2019 to 2021. So actually more recent than some other suits we've seen against Shaq Combs have been in the early 2000s or even the 90s, but according to reporting in the suit, Pines is alleging a few different things here. Now, before we even get into it, and there is a lot to get into, you might be wondering, what the heck does that name mean? What are we talking about when we said Wild King Nights? Well, part of this lawsuit alleges that Pines had to prove his loyalty to Shaq Combs, who was dubbed the king by performing sex acts for him. Hence the name Wild King Nights. The suit even reportedly says that Pines was treated, quote, like an animal playing fetch in order to prove his loyalty. And by the way, that is just one of the many disturbing details in this lawsuit. So to help me break it down, I want to bring on friend of the show, defense attorney Mauricio Padilla, who has been our go-to as we've been covering the Sean Combs saga. Mauricio, so good to see you. Thanks so much. Happy holidays. Before we get into the... thank you. Before we get into the specifics here, I feel like we're almost becoming numb to the lawsuit, after the lawsuit, and do all of the allegations against Combs so far that we've seen make the claims here. These new claims, do you think it makes it more or less true? In other words, does the fact that a lawsuit comes out in late 2024, as opposed to maybe at the beginning of the year, right after he was arrested, but, on the heels of all the allegations so far, how should we all be thinking about yet another lawsuit against Sean Combs? I think little by little, it's chipping away at whatever he's got left as far as reputation-wise. I think when I read it, the biggest
and no longer
key
has a voice who will pursue justice for her accusation.
Somebody that was
as of the
taken
against Diddy, no expansion of the investigation, no isolation orders, no equipment access, no suspension of attorney communication.
He's got a problem on his hands
it appeared.
Because this,
and if what it
just
says
Jane
is
Doe
true,
or John
then
Doe
punishment.
or a random
Part
person.
3.
This is
The person
someone
no
that
longer
was,
in the system.
in
The
his
internal
circle under
personnel
his
database
employee.
of the Atlanta
So the
Federal
allegations
Detention
are
Center
serious, and
updated
as
its
we've
weekly
seen,
roster.
could be
Under the
foreshadowing,
category Special Personnel
testimony
Code
in the criminal
Adjustment,
case. When I
the
read
name
this,
of Warden
I
TD
can't
was
fathom
marked as
that
removed
the
from system
prosecutors
by
aren't
administrative
going to
order.
want to talk
There
to
was no
him
decision number
or
recorded.
include him,
It was
especially
deactivated.
regarding the
Her personal
allegations of
contact
scrubbing his
information
cell phone
disappeared from the
and
internal
other
network,
devices
exactly
for
3rd
evidence.
Detention Center.
Things of that nature that
No
when you
confirmation
read it,
exists.
it
Was
really,
made.
goes
The removal
hand in
of Warden
hand with the
TD's name
indictment.
was not
I
accompanied
wanna
by
get
any
into that,
or protective
especially the time
reassignment.
frame, because
At
let's keep this
11:20
in mind.
a.m., a printed copy of
Prosecutors
the
have
personnel deployment
alleged
chart was
criminal
generated
conduct
in
from
preparation for the
2008
new
to
week's schedule.
2024.
Under
This
the
would be right
section
in that
marked
time frame.
Internal Alert,
So let's
TD's name.
everybody keep that in mind. We'll talk more about it, but I have to get into a little bit more of these allegations, starting with what Pines says he was in charge of doing for these parties. What was his job? So one of the things Pines alleges here is that he was responsible for setting up these gatherings, which reportedly involved heavy usage of various illegal drugs and alcohol, sexual paraphernalia, and sometimes it would take place inside of Diddy's bedroom. He says that Diddy instructed him to prepare spaces with these specific items, quote, Plesipeo, was instructed by Sean Combs on multiple occasions to ensure his personal bedroom and/or various hotel rooms were set up with red lights, ice buckets, alcohol, marijuana joints, honey packs for male libido, baby oil, Astroglide, towels, illegal drugs, and I'm sorry to say this power. Banger sex machines, that's the way it's categorized. Now, if you're unfamiliar, Astroglide is a lubricant, and also on that list allegedly was erectile dysfunction, drug called callus, and the morning after pill. So these party supplies, he says, it's kept in a bag called the MVP, according to Rolling Stone, who says it reviewed a copy. The lawsuit, Pines says he couldn't just leave the supplies in the hallway and walk away. No, he alleges he had to be let into the room, meaning he ended up seeing what was going on behind closed doors. So to speak, by the something interest here, something very interesting here, I want to talk about is that Pin makes mention of fact that he was exposed to what was allegedly going on inside these rooms. He couldn't just drop the stuff off and leave if those allegations are true. How does that impact the strength of his claim, the strength of this lawsuit? Because allegedly he's a key eyewitness. He's a key eyewitness. And not only that, but he says that he was forced to look at the videos that memorialize these parties and these events when he was scrubbing the videos off of his phone. And he actually says that he was intimidated and threatened that if Sean Combs' family were to ever find the videos or images, that he would never work in the industry again. So not only was he live seeing the actual events that occurred, but he was also referenced to have to look at the videos and images that were when you have to scrub the phone. I mean, listen, this case is all-encompassing to the point that P. Diddy has successfully vilified baby oil. And if anybody thinks that that's not true, this Valentine show up to your bedroom with a bottle of baby oil and see what your spouse says. Wow, they're not going to like it. What is that? What a year. What a year. One of the things is, the thing that stuck out to me, you mentioned it before, these allegations are so consistent with what the allegations are that are laid up by prosecutors when they describe the freak-offs in their indictment. Right, these sex-fueled parties, these drug-fueled parties, the baby oil, the Astroglide, and it makes me wonder, do you think Mr. Pines is a cooperating witness for government B? If so, do you think he was one of the people that they originally spoke to when they were coming up with this, when they were drafting the indictment and coming up with the charges, or do you think he's come out after? Because again, I think the timing of the lawsuit's important at the end of the year. Right now, talk to me about what you think his role might be. If I had to guess, I would figure that the feds already talked to him, just because I know from my experience dealing with them how all-encompassing their investigations are, and if he really was his executive from the time frame that they alleged. In the lawsuit, I can't see a scenario where they wouldn't. They investigate regular cases to the point that that I'm shocked when I see it as a commercial defense attorney with regular people when you're talking about a high-profile celebrity case like this. I can't fathom that. No one spoke to this individual prior to this. So I would think that they did speak to him, and I can't imagine that he's not a witness, because the way that they work is they want everybody that can cooperate their theory of the case to be on their witnesses, or to be somebody that they could call. And I can't think that if he actually was his assistant for this time frame, he would be an excellent witness for them. See, the problem is we don't know who the witnesses are in that criminal case yet. I don't know when we're going to know, maybe closer to trial, but you have to imagine that their case is built on more than just the testimony of one alleged victim, right? Victim one in the indictment, it has to be more. And even if we assume victim one is Cassandra Ventura, Cole's ex-girlfriend, who filed that initial lawsuit against him, recounted a lot of these details that are consistent with the indictment, talking about the freak-offs and all this, it has to be more than just her. So when I hear something like this, I will tell you, out of a lot of the lawsuits that I've covered over the past several months, this is one of them, one of the few that I actually think is the most consistent with what prosecutors are charging Sean Combs with, right? Sex trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy, transportation to engage in prostitution. And it just makes me think that this is why he may play such a role. We could be wrong, though. And it also talks about Sean Combs physically attacking Jest that he KCK somebody in the stomach, that he kicked somebody in the buttocks. So it's really tying together the theory that the prosecution is put out there in their indictment. And yeah, I mean, or I believe that he is a witness. I mean, it's really mimicking a lot of the same things that the federal government is saying that Sean Combs was up to during this time period. And because the government says, it was a racketeering conspiracy, it was a criminal enterprise. He had associates of his who would set up these events, and also
present,
clean up
and no
these
longer
events,
has a
which, by the
voice
way,
who will pursue
let me get back
justice
to
for her
this
accusation.
lawsuit, because Pines says
As of the
his role
taken
didn't
against
just
Diddy,
stop at
no
preparing
expansion
this.
of the
He also
investigation,
says he had
no
to clean up
isolation
these
orders,
rooms
no
afterwards.
equipment
And
access,
the cleanup
no
is not
suspension of
any
attorney
less
communication,
disturbing. According
as it
to the
appeared.
lawsuit,
And if what it
PL,
says
if
is
that would
true,
remove
then
any
punishment.
evidence of
Part
drugs,
3.
condoms,
The person no longer
sex
in the
toys,
system. The internal
remove
personnel
bodily
database
stains,
of the
like
Atlanta
blood,
Federal
urine,
Detention Center
and fluids
updated its
from any
weekly
sheets,
roster.
furniture,
Under the
and
category
pack away
Special Personnel
all the
Code
items
Adjustment,
used during
the
wild
name of
canines.
Warden TD
And
was
all of
marked
this
as
cleanup,
removed
he
from
says,
system by
was also
administrative
part of a
order.
cover-up,
There
so
was
that
no
no one
decision
would
number
suspect
recorded,
anything was
but was
going on.
deactivated.
And that
Her personal
alleged
contact
cover-up
information
also
disappeared from the
included
internal
leaving very
network
large
exactly
tips
3rd
for the
Detention
housekeeping
Center.
staff to
No
essentially
confirmation
prevent them from
exists
reporting
application was
anything
made.
and going
The removal
even
of
further
Warden
into the
TD's
duties
name
of
was
his
not
supposed
accompanied by
cleanup.
any
This
or
also
protective
extended, as we
reassignment.
were talking about,
At
to wiping
11:20 a.m., a
Diddy's
printed
personal
copy of the
devices
personnel
of any
deployment
evidence,
chart was
according to the
generated in
lawsuit,
preparation
reviewed
for
by
the new
Rolling
week's
Stone.
schedule.
PL,
Under the section marked
PL
Internal
was
Alert,
further
TD's
instructed to
name
scrub Sean Combs' personal devices, including, but not limited to, personal phones, laptops, tablets of any compromising videos. And by the way, unfortunately in doing so, says he was once again unwillingly exposed to the alleged conduct that was occurring in order to accomplish this unreasonable task. Plaintiff would have to, again, unwillingly see the video and then erase it. Okay, Mauricio, let me ask you this. How does he prove this? How does he prove all this happens? It just his testimony. Will you try to subpoena those people to come forward? How do you prove something was deleted? Talk to me. Well, first of all, I can only imagine how sloppy Sean Combs was with evidence when he got busted with those 2 machine guns, or 3 machine guns with the altered serial numbers. So, I really don't trust Sean Combs or the people around him's ability to properly cover up anything. So I envision that you're going to see a trial, payments from his AMX for flights, for people straight payments directly from his company to people, and then the time frame is important because happened in hotels, in places that have surveillance, that there's records that could be consistent with his testimony about when he alleges that these parties took place. He probably has his own information about who attended the events. When you're somebody like Sean Combs and you're such a celebrity and you're engaged in this type of behavior, people around you are memorializing it. It's on their own. So I feel like this guy probably was creating his case prior to him even filing this lawsuit back when it was happening, because when you're part of this, and if this is true that he's threatening you with a threat of being fired, with the threat of being ostracized in the industry, he may have taken steps to memorialize this himself, saying, you know what, I may have to defend myself in the future, and I'm going to start keeping records of what's going on. So I wouldn't doubt it if we see something like that. Does it hurt or help him that I'm talking about Mr. Pines, that he could be seen as an active participant in this, that he was complicit in it? Does it hurt his case? Does it hurt maybe if he takes the stand, testifies against Sean Combs at a criminal trial? I mean, listen, it's a double-edged sword. If it hurts or it helps, yeah, he was complicit. He even admits in his lawsuit that he went as far as to start having sex with this woman when Sean Combs forced him. But then he felt bad. So a lot of people are going to be like, well, you felt bad about it, but you got erection and you started to have sex with her. So how badly did you feel about it? And I'm sure that his lawyers Sean Combs' lawyers are going to attack that. Like, yeah, you were a willing participant. You actually had sex with this woman. You penetrated her. And all of a sudden, years later, you want to back out and say, I wasn't a willing participant. I was forced. And I think you're going to see that a lot in the criminal trial as well, where they're going to be like, oh, all of a sudden, Sean Combs flew you to a destination, paid you $20,000 to take part in an orgy, gave you drugs for you're the victim. You're the victim. You weren't you didn't want to do it. And I think that we're going to see that a lot, not only from Mr. Pines, but from a lot of the witnesses that are going to come forward in the actual case, where Sean Combs' attorneys are going to be, labeling them as, willing participants in something that is not illegal. The problem is that, as we've discussed in before, even if you were doing this on the regular since 2008, it's illegal, and it's illegal to pay somebody to cross state lines to form a sex act, and it's illegal to cross the lines with drugs to have these orgies. This stuff's illegal, and one of the main underlying themes in the indictment, and I think you could argue here, is the element of using fraud, force, or coercion to force people to engage in these alleged sex acts. Because according to the review by Rolling Stone, Pines says, if the devices, going back to the devices, for example, if the devices weren't wiped clean, there would be severe consequences. Plain, if was true, that if any of Sean Combs' family sees the videos, either on the personal device or cloud-based storage, PLFF would be terminated with negative comments, so that he could never be in the entertainment industry. That's something you mentioned, Marissa, and I think that's interesting. By the way, on a side note, if that is true, why maybe in the face of all these allegations, his family has stood by him, right? So if all this is true, if all this is true, and again, Sean Combs has not been found guilty, he's not been found liable in any of these lawsuits, but if all of this is true, it makes me wonder, did he compartmentalize his life and keep it away from his family? Because they have been backing him. So let's start there. So what do you think about that, Mauricio? Well, I mean, listen, it seems to me from the lawsuit that I read involving his son that he really wasn't compartmentalizing anything with his son, because apparently his son was involved in these parties, at least the one on the super yacht that ended up in a lawsuit. The issue is, I mean, when you're Sean Combs' son and you're 20 old, and your dad isn't drawing boldly defined lines in what's acceptable and what's not, one can imagine that maybe his son was mimicking his father, committing the same mistakes as his father, and that's a problem. Because as we discussed before,
and no longer has a voice who will pursue justice for her accusation. As of the taken against Diddy, no expansion of the investigation, no isolation orders, no equipment access, no suspension of attorney communication, as it appeared. And if what it says is true, then punishment. Part 3. The person no longer in the system. The internal personnel database of the Atlanta Federal Detention Center updated its weekly roster. Under the category Special Personnel Code Adjustment, the name of Warden TD was marked as removed from system by administrative order. There was no decision number recorded, but was deactivated. Her personal contact information disappeared from the internal network exactly 3rd Detention Center. No confirmation exists as patient was made. The removal of Warden TD's name was not accompanied by any or protective reassignment. At 11:20 a.m., a printed copy of the personnel deployment chart was generated in preparation for the new week's schedule. Under the section marked Internal Alert, TD's name.
What's your thoughts? Well, listen, anytime that, from what I've read, if they wanted to say that he was part of the conspiracy, they could, because anybody that helps in furtherance of the conspiracy can be roped into it. So if you were handing out drugs, you were scrubbing devices, if you were, picking up sex workers at the airport and bringing them to the hotel. Yeah, you're part of it. So I would envision that if the government wanted him to testify, they would offer him immunity because you're right, some of the things that he says could lead to, admissions of guilt and wrongdoing in the criminal sense. So I would envision that they would offer him immunity. Interesting now, by the way, his responsibilities, we talked about him allegedly setting up and cleaning up these, alleged escapades, but that is not where the lawsuit ends, was talking about before there was another harrowing allegation.
When the first images from the federal raid on Diddy's $40 million Los Angeles estate were released, no one expected this.
Graphic
Neatly stacked in display cabinets like prized possessions were 200 bottles of baby oil. Right next to them, over 900 bottles of lubricant, rows and rows. It looked less like a home and more like a warehouse for something far more disturbing. These weren't the kind of items most people keep in bulk, but for investigators, it painted a chilling picture. Why would one of the most powerful men in hip-hop need this much? And more importantly, what exactly were they used
pushing
for?
him into a female PO. And remember how we mentioned that this was what the supposed meaning behind these wild king nights was. Well, it's Rolling Stone who mentions that this appears in this lawsuit, was sexually rubbing the shoulder of the plane of Pines, informing him to show loyalty to the king. And the next part is just graphic, but let me just say, it involved Pines supposedly having sex with this female guest and then exposing himself to Combs as well. And now after he says he went along with this because he was fearful, and then he steps out of the room, apparently upset. Mauricio, he's suing, my understanding, based on reporting for a number of causes of action. Here, sexual battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Does that apply to these circumstances? Everything I've described so far. Yeah, I mean, listen, intentional infliction of emotional distress, based on what he's describing here, is completely account that could survive. Everything that he's saying is the type of thing that it could be defended, but it's definitely something that Sean Combs has to worry about. Civil. And they also sued his companies. So it's not only him, it's Bad Boy Records, and it's a couple of other companies that under Sean Combs' control. The allegations, especially the ones that include violence, are pretty alarming. Listen, if I was cross-examining this guy at the end of the day, he admits that, he penetrated this woman. And if you penetrate somebody, yeah, there's an issue of, were you aroused or not? I mean, are you forced or not? Did you want to or not? And when a man penetrates a woman, the argument is, and I'm sure this is going to come up in trial or in deposition, you wanted to do it at least at some level, you were wrecked and you penetrated her so well. I mean, the other way is look, the other way of flipping the narrative is like, look who I'm around, look what I'm witnessing, look what he's doing. And you mentioned it before. Pines also alleges that he actually witnessed Combs kick a guest during a party, that during a birthday celebration in Turks and Chaos, Combs didn't tell anybody he had COVID, actually gave another person COVID, and Pines was instructed to keep quiet. Again, we're talking about Sean Combs, not in 2024, but Sean Combs, years ago, who was at the height of his power, wealth, and fame. I mean, that is something that is a common theme throughout all these cases, and one of the reasons why you have seen a number of these lawsuits come out after Sean Combs was either indicted or arrested, and particularly after his bail was denied. So that was a big concept too, is that he no longer can attack you and he can no longer be a threat to you. That at least is the allegation.
put forward and one of the reasonings that's been put forward by a number of his accusers. And by the way, let me just go back to this. So while Diddy, of course, is at the center of these allegations, as Mauricio said, in this lawsuit that was reviewed by Rolling Stone, he's named Combs Enterprises, Bad Boy Entertainment, and a senior employee named Christina Quorum. Now, Quorum was mentioned in a filing by music producer Rodney Jones. I want to talk about that for a second here, because Christina Quorum is allegedly Sean Combs' right-hand woman. She's even been described as a sort of Ghislaine Maxwell-type figure to Combs, and we know, of course, that Maxwell is the woman who is convicted of trafficking young girls in behalf of her boss, Jeffrey Epstein, and boyfriend, her accomplice, whatever you want to call him. Now, according to a complaint that we've talked about here before, this was filed by Rodney Jones as the chief of staff defendant. Quorum was instrumental in organizing and executing the RICO and TVPI enterprises. That's the sex traffic enterprises. And of course, we can't be totally sure what her alleged role is in these Wild King nights. But that is just some background a little bit on Miss Quorum. And Mauricio,
Present, and no longer has a voice who will pursue justice for her accusation. As of the taken against Diddy, no expansion of the investigation, no isolation orders, no equipment access, no suspension of attorney communication, as it appeared. And if what it says is true, then punishment. Part 3. The person no longer in the system. The internal personnel database of the Atlanta Federal Detention Center updated its weekly roster. Under the category Special Personnel Code Adjustment, the name of Warden TD was marked as removed from system by administrative order. There was no decision number recorded. It was deactivated. Her personal contact information disappeared from the internal network exactly 3rd Detention Center. No confirmation exists as the was made. The removal of Warden TD's name was not accompanied by any or protective reassignment. At 11:20 a.m., a printed copy of the personnel deployment chart was generated in preparation for the new week's schedule. Under the section marked Internal Alert, TD's name
think that, he was sloppy in the way that he undid these crimes, that there's probably a trail of evidence not only involving him, but everybody in his circle that he would, delegate these responsibilities to. And those people, when they're faced with the reality of, hey, do you want to testify or do you want to, possibly do time, I think we're going to see a lot of people testifying against them. And it's not that just even a power dynamic between an employer and employee, it's the power dynamic between comes as your employer and you as the employee. I think that's going to be a big theme, as I mentioned before. Now, as for Sean Combs, we mentioned he's facing federal charges of racketeering and sex trafficking. He's pleading not guilty to these charges. He's presumed innocent until proven guilty. But Combs' attorneys denied these allegations in this lawsuit, saying in a statement to Rolling Stone magazine, no matter how many lawsuits are filed, it won't change the fact that Mr. Combs has never sexually assaulted or sex trafficked anyone, man or woman, adult or minor. We live in a world anyone can file a lawsuit for any reason. Fortunately, a fair and impartial judicial process exists to find the truth, and Mr. Combs is confident he will prevail in court. Real quick, Marseilles, before we wrap this up, he is right, he is an innocent until proven guilty. If he is acquitted in his criminal trial, what happens to the other lawsuits? You think they still go forward? Yeah, they go forward. You're dealing with a different bar regarding, whether it's reasonable doubt or preponderance of the evidence. You could be found in not guilty of a criminal case, but they could have, more than enough evidence to convict you in a civil trial. These civil guys are looking for money. They're not going to stop, no matter what, even if he's acquitted or not. It's a completely different threshold, and I don't see them stopping until they actually get money from him, which is what they want. But, but do you think that these planes, who, as I mentioned, it seems that they came forward, particularly after Combs was arrested and now he's been denied bail, if he is acquitted and he is released, do you think that they'll still want go after him? Well, listen, I think so, because their name's already in the media. They've already started, this fight. That means if he's and he's out and you're fearful of, retribution, you're still on his hit list, no matter what. Just because you started, might as well finish it and might as well try and get your money. These lawsuits cost money, so the lawyers are going to be, on the hook for everything that they put forward regarding cost. So they're going to want to generate revenue from these lawsuits. So I don't think they're going to stop until they get money. All right, Mauricio Pilates and you, thanks so much for coming on. Thanks, man. Thanks so much. All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.